right. Hello, everyone. Hello. It's me, a doc named Danny. Welcome back to at Black Psychiatry's Black Mental Health and Wealth Tonight Town Hall. So I'm really excited and I appreciate all our wonderful speakers and panelists from the community who have decided to do something for the community. Every time someone agrees to do this, on their own time and own time, I am appreciative. So thank you very much to all of our panelists who are volunteering their time for this panel. And we're going to really talk about something that I think is something that we all need to know about. I don't know if how everyone else was raised, but I have posted today on social media that this was a big issue in my home and my family growing up, just the impact of financial insecurity, financial stability, income, wealth status, the wealth gap on the Black community. So we know that racism touches every part of the American system, be it healthcare, housing, law, policies, and of course the economy. So I've assembled a panel of experts from various fields and sectors to have an open conversation about Black mental health and wealth in America. Today's very important topic is the relationship between Black mental health and wealth. I might even ask them about these susus that some of y'all are in if we have time. So we're going to get all the way into it. I'm just going to do a brief intro. What I'm going to do is not even going to touch on the accolades and the intro that these panelists did, but I really want us to get into the conversation. And I want to thank the panelists. Thank you, Howard University Department of Psychiatry, the institution that pays me, and the Black Psychiatrists of America for supporting this event. So I usually start in the reverse alphabetical order because I feel like the end of the alphabet always gets left out since elementary school. So first we have Dr. Sarah Vinson, who is a physician who specializes in adult, child, and adolescent and forensic psychiatry. She's the founder of the L'Oreal Psych Group in Atlanta, Georgia. She's a fellowship director at Morehouse. She's the founder and senior editor of Ourselves Black magazine. If you don't know about it, Google it. So hello, Dr. Vinson. You know she's a longtime Black psychiatry panelist and my partner in designing and really coming up with these ideas. Next, we have Dr. Kunmi Sobowale. He is also a child and adolescent psychiatrist in training. He's a fellow at UCLA, University of California, Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. His research, so this is really cool, his research includes the effects of mental health and economic interventions on family economic well-being, mental health, and child development. And he started this back when he was a resident in New Haven. Some of y'all might know about Yale. Next, we have Dr. Atassa Jordan, who is a psychiatry resident in Philadelphia. She recently completed a 5-year MD, MBA program at UPenn with the Wharton School of Business. She has worked to help create multi-million-dollar companies before she was even 30 years old, bought for her first house before she was even 30 years old. So I need to take some notes from her because I just got here now at 35. And next we have Dewan Hopewell. Hello, Dewan. He is the content editor for We Buy Black. If you don't know about We Buy Black, please just look on your phone, go on Instagram and really see about the reach that We Buy Black has. We Buy Black is the largest online marketplace for Black-owned businesses. You can purchase any and everything you need from our community right there. And last but certainly not least, we have Joseph Armah, who is the founder and CEO of Armah Financial Services. He's an engineer and the founder of these financial services. He's a financial advisor who devotes his expertise to helping small business owners and individuals create and maintain financial wealth. And I think that's especially for Black businesses, right, Joseph? Okay. Oh, everyone? Okay. All right. So we're really going to get into the questions. And my first question is going to go out now. Audience, remember that you can, listeners, streamers, you can ask questions. We are going to keep up with them. But our first question is going to go to the one and only Dr. Sarah Vinson. And I just want to know, how does income or socioeconomic status affect mental health, or does it? Dr. Vinson, let us know. Oh, you're muted. Okay, we gotta
It would help to be unmuted. So when I was in medical school, there was this discussion of downward drift, right? That because you had mental illness, you couldn't hold a job, you didn't have a strong social connections, and so over time, your socioeconomic status went down. They didn't talk about the fact that poverty in and of itself and going without having basic needs met, which is itself its own form of trauma, actually predisposes people to mental health problems, including things that were often framed as more biologically based, like schizophrenia. So we know that there is a bidirectional relationship between poverty and mental health problems. And when you're thinking about the other end of the spectrum, in terms of being mentally well and mental health, the ability to realize your potential, to make contributions to your community, to use adaptive coping mechanisms, to have options for what your coping mechanisms are really dependent in a capitalistic society on having the resources to do the things that are in your best interest.
Okay, that was a lot. You told us everything. So yeah, there is an impact. I think that's what you told us. And if you don't know, streamers, I'm gonna be taking notes. If you seem like I'm looking down, I'm taking notes because I need to learn all these things so I can get myself together. All right, Dr. Sobowale Kumi, does poverty result in depression? If yes, it might be no. What are the interventions that can help with financial hardship and stress in Black families?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna build on what Dr. Vincent said. So essentially, there's the social drift aspect from mental illness to poverty, and then there's the opposite side, the social causation pathway that's been studied more over time. And basically, what you find is that no matter how you look at poverty, whether it's lack of access to resources, whether it's lack of money, whether it's unemployment, whether it's debt, they all increase the risk for developing depression. And we see this in poor countries, we see this in rich countries. And so that has been shown time and time again. And it's important to think about what's behind that. It's things like what you're exposed to in your environment. So are you living potentially in a place where you're exposed to violence? Are you also potentially not getting the material needs you need, like food insecurity and malnutrition that we know is important for health? Are you developing physical illness that leads to mental health? So there's a lot to it that can lead from poverty to mental illness. And so then we have to think about what are the interventions, and it's going to vary depending on which pathway it is, what aspect of poverty or not having money or unemployment or debt. And then we have to think about interventions either at the individual level. So that may be things like financial counseling, that may be things like access to mental health care, because that's important as well. And then it could be structural things like policies, how do we change some of these root causes within themselves? So those are some of the interventions that one could think about that could be helpful.
Okay, then I was muted. All right, thank you, thank you for that. That's important, and I like how we talked about some of the interventions that we have. Talk about some of the things that we can do as individuals. However, I have a question that, for those of you who know me now, probably know what the answer might be. But Joseph Arma, the wise financial advisor, can you tell me, please, is the wealth gap that we see in Black communities, is that a result of individual choices and cultural characteristics? Or is it possibly something structural, maybe something structural, I don't know, something like structural racism, I'm not sure, or policies and institutional practices? Let me let you answer that. Let me unmute you there.
I've got to tell you, this is a topic that is very dear to my heart. My wife is a psychiatrist, and we've had the mental health Black World discussion for years. and I've grown to appreciate the mental health Black wealth interdependence. I've also spent over 20 years in the investment and finance industry, so I'm keenly aware of the racial wealth gap. Just to set the stage, let's define wealth. In its simplest form, wealth is the difference between assets you own and the liabilities you owe. So from that definition, we can agree it is possible to be gainfully employed, but for huge student loans, you could have negative net worth. And the negative net worth is what makes it impossible to pay for emergencies such as unexpected healthcare expenses or broken down car repairs. Now, to the heart of the matter. The racial wealth gap is truly a function of the initial endowment that we all start our journeys with. Whether we are talking about community assets, family wealth, family income, or family savings, there is a huge discrepancy between the initial endowment of Black and white Americans. And I like to use the analogy of two runners in a 100-meter dash to explain the concept. Let's assume one of the runners is at the 40-yard line and the other at the starting blocks. Even if the one at the starting blocks has superior capabilities, there is a higher probability that the gap will continue to persist. Unfortunately, if the group in the lead perceives the situation as a race where one party will win and the other will lose, then we can imagine it will be difficult to change the status quo. On the other hand, if through tactical empathy, both participants win, in this case, through maybe an increase in US gross domestic product, which can be in trillions of dollars, or better health outcomes, then significant progress can be made. Now, we have systemic, political, and institutional discriminatory factors that have been created that have been in place to create this wealth gap. And the gap continues to grow as a result of these same factors. And just to make a point on this, Black folks were not even allowed to own life insurance, which is one reliable vehicle of transferring wealth until quite recently. They were just only allowed to own funeral insurance. And so you can tell from that, even recent work has also shown that even when we take everything into consideration from the work that was done, which says, what we get wrong about closing the racial gap, and it sort of talks about if Blacks did everything possible, it is still impossible for us to close that racial gap, racial wealth gap. So the point is the structural issues and policies brought us here, and those are the same things that are going to take us away.
I knew you were going to come through with the facts. In fact, only, Joseph, I knew it. I was over here. I said I was going to learn. I did not know that Black people weren't allowed to own life insurance until recently. Like, that is something that, just look at the policies that keep the Black community in the place that they are, that they have been set in and remain in because of institutional and structural policies that everyone knows I'm always here to fight against. All right, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, Dr. Atasha Jordan, you are our youngest, youthiest member of the, that's not a word, y'all, of the panel. And since we just learned, well, I just learned some things from Joseph Armah over there. Tell me, as such a young woman who has this knowledge and has been taught these things that many of us were lacking growing up and just in our families and communities, when do we start talking about wealth building in Black communities? When should that happen?
Yeah. There we go. All right. Yeah, I couldn't control my mic myself. But yeah, no, I think that's like a really great question. And I have to say, like, I always joke that wealth in our community is something that I just wish was a more common conversation. I think with me, it's interesting where I find that it really started in the home. And it was something where I grew up in a family. So my parents both came from really humble means. We're from the Caribbean. I was born in the Caribbean. My family is from there fully. And it took a lot of hard work for them to get here. But I think what I recognize now looking back on it is the idea of a wealth mindset. So even though my parents grew up much more humbly than me and my siblings did. I would say that me and my siblings we grew up middle class with my parents. But my mother, I would 100% would say she is a woman who was middle class with a 1% mindset. And when I say that, it was that she was comfortable and felt blessed to be where she was, but always was thinking of how can you gain the knowledge and the information that the people who are in the 1% have, so that we could potentially one day get ourselves closer there. So thinking about when that starts, it starts when you're in the developmental phases of what is the family structure like. And I think I also like to say that wealth for me is not necessarily so much, or the wealth mindset rather, isn't really about how much money you have, but how you think about the money that you do have and how you can use it to work for you going forward. So for instance, one of the stories I love to tell, because I just remember this so fondly, and it really highlights to me the mindset that my parents really instilled in me and my siblings when we were growing up, was this idea that after music lessons every Saturday, and when we grew up in Florida, we would drive through like different neighborhoods and like basically just drive through the rich areas in the part of South Florida that we lived in, looking for the new development, basically the new housing developments that were coming up. And one of our family's pastimes would be to go to these houses that we absolutely could not afford, but we were not about to tell the realtors that. We were going into these houses, we would walk through them, see what they looked like, see what people who were multiple tiers above us in income brackets, what they were looking at. And for my parents, it was an activity in really just opening our eyes to what options exist and what our life could be like if we were to be able to work towards and learn the different ways to grow wealth to maybe one day get there. So I think the biggest thing I think about when we should start talking about wealth, you should start yesterday, but it's never too late. I mean, at any point, you can really change your mindset. And with that, it's about getting the knowledge. So learning about the multiple streams of income that exist. Because I think one of the things people talk about is the idea you can't get wealthy off of a 9-to-5 job. Like, to be able to get wealthy, you need to think about all of the alternative forms of income that the people at the 1% utilize to be able to be in the 1%. So kind of as Joseph mentioned, so thinking about life insurance, whether you're thinking about real estate, stocks, mutual funds, all of these alternative streams that sometimes we don't have the knowledge to get access to. It's about opening our mindsets to learn what some of these alternative options are to add on to our 9-to-5. And really with all of that, it's learning that over time. And obviously you're not going to just like go from one day knowing nothing to knowing everything, but being open to that process and kind of having the mindset that you want to be able to grow.
Yes. Okay. I feel like everyone was nodding their heads over there. That our youth member over here was dropping knowledge on us. I was over here just taking a little notes on my phone. Okay. So, Mr. Hopewell, Dewan, Dr. Jordan has told us a little bit about how we need to rethink our dollars and what we do with them and how we move ahead. What is the actual value of the black dollar? Does black dollar have value? Does that mean anything here in the United States or the world? Does it matter, like the black vote? I don't know. Can you tell me?
I think, most people naturally start with stats about, black buying power, 1 point, whatever, people like to spit those stats. I think what's much more practical and accessible is to say, how much is the black dollar valued by other people? So for example, it was a big headline several weeks ago that Netflix was going to put $100 million into black-owned financial institutions. Well, that 100 million was just kind of chump change because Netflix has about 5 billion with it being cash. And something like, according to Nielsen, 40% of black viewers subscribe to Netflix. So, we could ask Netflix, what is the value of the black dollar? It's clearly quite valuable. So the reality is everyone else realizes the value of it. It's up to black people to realize the value of it and harness the value of that dollar and use it to enrich somebody other than everybody else. That would be helpful. So the direct answer to your question is quite valuable, but it's only valuable to black people in as much as we value it and reinvest it internally.
You're on mute, Danielle.
Oh, okay. I was saying that thank you for that. I think that we already have a lot of questions coming over, but first we're answering my questions, streamers. So just know that thank you. Keep them coming. We're going to get to them soon. So we're doing great. Now, Dr. Vincent, I'm coming back to you, my fave child psychiatrist. Kumi, you're coming up on my fave list, don't worry. Financial distress and a lack of financial literacy impact many of our patients, our families, our friends, even ourselves. Can we address their mental health without addressing their financial health as well?
So we know that people need to have a sense of safety and security. And if their financial state is such that those needs aren't met, or that they may have to put themselves in compromising or unsafe positions in order to get those needs met, then that absolutely has implications for how people do in terms of their mental well-being. And I think another aspect of this is what trauma does and what it can do in terms of how people think about their future. So we don't talk about it as much as a symptom of trauma, but what you often see is this foreshortened sense of the future. If tomorrow doesn't seem as if it's promised to you, it's really hard to build toward and assume that tomorrow is going to happen and to make decisions that are based in tomorrow. So another piece of this is that the uncertainty and the lack of agency that poverty reinforces makes it difficult for you to buy into a wealth mindset or future planning, because you don't assume that that future is something, one, that you're going to have, or two, that you have any control over.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Dr. Sarah Vincent, always coming with what we need to know. Dr. Sobowale Kumi. So Dr. Vincent told us that, yeah, we can't really address it. Like, we can't ignore that people have these financial issues and they are struggling day to day, and that affects their hopelessness, their faith, their belief, their confidence, and just their willpower. So are there things that we as clinicians, as Black psychiatrists, and those who care for patients who are from the Black community who may not be Black, are there things that we as clinicians can do to help with these struggles in the Black community?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. And I really appreciate what Dr. Vincent said and everyone said. Yes. I mean, we can, as clinicians, it can be really overwhelming to think about all these structural injustices that have occurred that have led to this wealth gap, particularly for a lot of the patients that we serve. At the same time, there are some practical things we could do. So one is, the simplest thing is screening. And of course, whenever you want to screen for something like, are you having financial difficulties? Ideally, you want to have a resource to connect people with. You want to ask permission often, even before you ask questions like that, because money can be a sensitive issue for folks, of course. So you can screen, and then what are some tangible resources? So there's 211, of course, 211.org. I mean, there's different. That depends on the state. So that's one kind of tangible resource that you can get hooked up to services in their area. If you have a social worker, that is a blessing in your practice or wherever you work. Some of the work I've been involved in has been like looking at things like diaper need, which is the lack of diapers that can happen in folks who have little children. There are actually diaper banks. So there's a national diaper bank kind of network. So these are just tangible things on the individual level. There's also like the things we can think about from kind of a more structural level. So there are some programs and some medical centers that have financial interventions on site, whether it's helping people sign up and do their taxes, because for a lot of low-income folks, if you are working, you qualify for certain benefits like the earned income tax credit. So about 20% of people who are qualified for that credit don't actually receive it because they don't do their taxes, right? So there's been some organizations, one's called Street Cred, that works in medical centers to help. There's also VITA programs that work around the country that help people do their taxes for free as well. So that's something practical. We need to also kind of advocate for some of the policies like paid parental leave for new parents. We need to advocate for expanding some credits that only apply for people who are working, because it misses a lot of vulnerable people. We need to talk about fair housing, mixed housing, increase in minimum wage. These are all things we can advocate for, and policymakers definitely appreciate our voice. So there's a lot we can do. From the individual level to the structural, so we should learn what's going on locally in our own communities, and also what we can do at a bigger level.
Definitely. So you're telling me, sounds like there are some things that we could do to help our patients, and maybe that we could include some structural and community aspects in these treatment plans that we learn how to make all of these years in training in medical school. Okay. That's what you said, right? All right. Joseph, Arma, now we're talking about that, and we've discussed what we can do maybe as clinicians, but I just want to have a perfect understanding here from an expert like you while I have you here and I don't have to pay you a fee, like my financial advisor. Is there a cost to being Black? And I mean specifically, do Black people pay more for ownership of similar assets when we're considering their white or non-Black counterparts?
Great question. And simply put, there's a cost to being Black in America. Whether you like it or not, there is. And I will use an example of even in private equity, when you're trying to access capital and the ease at which you can really even access that capital and who you have to talk to in order to get that capital. Now, great ideas oftentimes will move the needle, but when you look at across board, you look at banking, you look at investing, you look at home ownership, look at student loan debt, unemployment, business ownership, the evidence is really overwhelming that because of the structural issues that we have, things of the nature such as redlining, or things like students asking for loans, and obviously parents accumulate money in the first year, but they don't have a way to pay it in the second, third, and fourth year. And as a result of that, students, cannot pay for their education, and so they leave the schools, and then they have this debt. And because they have this debt and high credit card, very low credit card scores, they cannot even move on with their lives. And so it is quite unfortunate, but the truth is that there is some cost to being Black in America. And one of the things we can do is to fight against these structures that are currently in place so that we can move the needle forward. The one thing that is also interesting is geographically, where you think about where you live and think about the different states, there's somebody who might be living in the South who might be paying even more than another person living in the North or some other parts of the country, just because of the way the regions have been defined and what the prevailing issues are. So, and we find that where there is more a large aggregation of Black folks, the cost of doing business is often very high. So those are things that I think we have to be all aware of and basically do our research, and to make sure that we don't incur extra debt or basically move to places where we can get better credits. But their cost is really real, and we have to sort of bring these structural issues down.
I appreciate that. Definitely one of the viewers over here called it the Black tax, and we know that the Black tax is real. We know the Black tax is real in every aspect, especially medicine, the economy. So we have to recognize that this is something that it's been placed on us because of institutions and structures. And I just want to know, Dr. Jordan, when should we talk to our patients about things like this, about these financial stressors? I keep asking you when, because you're ahead of the game from, I'm not going to speak for everyone, I'm going to speak for myself. You're ahead of the game over here. So when should we talk to patients about this, or should we? When's the right time? Never, or what do you think?
Yeah, so I think, so first as context, so my experience, just for everyone watching, I'm a resident and I am a second year in my program, meaning that most of my work is right now in the inpatient units where patients are acutely psychiatrically ill. And even already, I've had multiple instances where I have felt that there was a need to talk with my patient or maybe even the patient's family about finances, because unfortunately, when we talk about mental health and the way that we have a insurance-based system in which people are getting access to mental health care on the basis of how much money they have access to, that's not an equal playing field for everyone. So when we write treatment plans, kind of going back to Dr. Sobowale's point of we need to be able to be entrenched into the community to be able to provide resources. But if we're providing plans that our patients can't even afford, are we truly even giving them care? So with that in mind, some of the ways that I have actively on the units kind of worked with patients, thinking about their healthcare going forward, one of the easiest ways that I have found is budgets. And I think that's something that can be helpful for anyone. Sometimes, honestly, I think it's for literally anyone. If you have access to money, you should have a budget of how much you plan to spend, how much you actually spend compared to that on a monthly basis. But with my patients, I sometimes will walk through with them, what is the income sources that they have? What are their expenses, their living costs, food, clothing, kind of utilities, all of that. And then work through to see what's the wiggle room, what does insurance cover, and is the plan that I'm creating for you realistic? And I cannot say I do that for every single patient, but there are some patients where I have noticed that whether they're like coming back to the hospital multiple times and I'm asking, okay, so what is not working once you leave the hospital? And sometimes they literally tell me they can't afford to go to their doctor. So having those conversations I've found to be helpful. Some other things I actually have found to be helpful to talk to patients about is the idea of having health savings accounts or like a flexible saving account where you get the benefit of not having taxes deducted from that money. So it's money you take away from your paycheck kind of at the beginning of a fiscal cycle. You put that money away separately from the rest of your paycheck, untaxed money that you can then use going forward, kind of like almost like a debit card really, to be able to then pay for your healthcare going forward. So that's something else I've discussed with patients. Another resource I learned about recently, so I actually haven't told people about it yet, but now I am because I thought it was like so incredible to learn about, but the idea of something called a special needs trust. So people who have lots of money tend to put away trusts, whether for their children as they're working towards building generational wealth, really just protecting that money. But there's something particularly called a special needs trust. And I say this particularly, let's say, for families with severe mental illness and serious mental illness, thinking of your schizophrenia or bipolar type diagnoses, where a lot of times the patient's function level and their ability to work on their own in the future and have their own earning potential is diminished. And these special needs trusts are things that families can put in place to be able to help those persons to be able to continue to pay for and just have money to live once the caretakers have gone on. So those are the types of things that we can talk about, I think, especially from an outpatient standpoint. When you get to see patients more on a regular level, you can really kind of have those conversations. But again, I think the biggest thing is, are we providing treatment plans that our patients can actually even afford to follow through on? And that's something that we have to be mindful of.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. That is awesome. I saw Joseph Amar up there nodding, so you must be saying something right up there. Maybe you could be my doctor so that you could have gotten me on a budget and get me together already for my anxiety. Then maybe I would be in a different place. But thank you for that, Dr. Jordan. I like that. I don't think, let me say I'm not, I just graduated from residency last year, obviously, but I don't think that I've ever really discussed a budget with my patients. I think we have to really understand the different places that patients are in and really understand how structures and institutions inform and impact who can have access to care. And I really definitely consider transportation and try to work on different things with transportation and how often they need to come in. I know that many of my patients cannot come to weekly therapy appointments. They might not even be able to come to bi-weekly or monthly appointments. And we have to really think about it, about when we schedule their appointments, when they still have funds, when they're able to do these things, when they can pay co-pays. And we all know that is access. So let me ask Mr. Hopewell, what is the benefit? Is there a benefit? Let me not say what. Is there a benefit to investing in our own community? Is there a benefit to buying blocks? Is there a benefit to only supporting Black businesses? What's the benefit of that? What do we need to do? Why does it matter?
No, there's no benefit at all. No, I'm playing. The obvious answer is yes. Look, I say this. No one can oppress you unless you give them the money to do it. I mean, just really stop and think about this. No one can oppress you unless you actually give them the money to do it. And so in many ways, I wish that people would skip the protest and look at your spending. If you leave a protest and then you go to, whatever bank that's out here doing, what was the value of the protest? So, he mentioned earlier that Black folks couldn't get insurance before. And what we find in history is, as a result of that level of discrimination, there were Black insurance companies that were birthed out of that. And in fact, in 1925, I believe the stat is, the top 8 Black insurance companies in America were doing about $2 billion with a B, the equivalent today, what would be $2 billion a year in policies. Insurance companies have a really interesting problem, which is at any given time, they've taken way more money than they can dole out because, let's take life insurance. They've already figured out how many of you are going to die every year, right? So they're going to take a premium from everybody and settle those, right? So they always have this cash. So what do you do with the leftover money? Well, for Black insurance companies, historically, the answer was invest in Black neighborhoods. There's a professor of business history at Wichita State University, Robert Weems, and he talks about this correlation. As Black insurance companies have declined, so have Black neighborhoods. Primarily what Black insurance companies were doing was investing in mortgage products and those types of things, right? So they were taking their excess cash and investing. So again, that's just a pretty blatant example. Incidentally, there was no reason why Black insurance agencies went down other than Black people literally chose integration over Black insurance companies. It became a status symbol to get a policy from a white company that literally wouldn't sell your policy 10 years earlier. Somehow that was desirable versus Black insurance companies that were actually investing in Black neighborhoods. That's the type of which, I'm not a mental health professional, maybe someone else can speak to that, but the type of damage that segregation did to Black folks where they thought that was something to aspire to, which is, in 2020, absolutely insane. But again, at the end of the day, nobody can oppress you unless you give them the money to do it. So in reality, whether we're talking about banking products, insurance products, whether we're talking about just day-to-day spending, where is it all going? I mean, that is the most powerful protest you can give is where is this money going? Because the reality is ever since we kept statistics, Black unemployment has always been about twice that of white unemployment, good times, bad times, what have you. Okay, well, at the end of the day, no one's going to care about that except Black people. Nobody's going to care that your unemployment rate, like if my neighbor needs an oil change, I guess hypothetically I care, but I don't really care. So the notion that someone else is going to care about your problem is absolutely crazy. And so it's for Black people to get serious enough to love themselves enough to say, I'm not going to finance my own oppression. So me personally, I go out of my way to spend money with Black people because no one hires more Black people than Black-owned businesses and the government, incidentally. Those are the two entities where you find Black people overrepresented, right? So in that sense, it's just like, yeah, I have a choice. So whether it's, I drink a lot of tea. And so, I'm sitting here right now with my Black Mama Tea, Black woman-owned company out of New York. Like I make these decisions. My banking, we talk about, buying Black, but what about the banking? Banks support a lot of companies and a lot of businesses, right? And so if you say I'm going to buy Black and then put this money in Chase, who's investing in Dubai and everything else, not in your community, that makes no sense. And incidentally, I mean, if you look at the history of all these banks, all these insurance companies, where do they come from? So the notion of me putting my money into institutions that finance my great-great-grandmother being raped is crazy. In the same way that to this day, Jewish people, a lot of them will not buy a BMW because BMW obviously was rooted in the Nazi party, and you had Jewish slave labor being used in those plants. They're sane enough to say, I'm not going to support that. I get the history, don't want to be a part of it. Black people have to love themselves enough to withdraw and invest. I'm sorry, I get a bit passionate.
Ooh, that was several words there. Several, not a word, but several words.
And incidentally, again, extending on the example of insurance, by 1973, you had just one company, Atlanta Life Insurance, which was founded by Alonzo Herndon right on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta. They were doing as a company what would be the equivalent today of over $2 billion a year. There was no reason why that company couldn't continue to grow. So again, these are conscious choices that we're making. We can reverse those choices today. The reality is, yes, racism affects us. And yes, there is structural inequality. But on a personal level, I believe that the biggest enemy we have today is convenience. We are addicted to convenience, so much so that we will allow our children to live in a world where they're not free because it's much more convenient to just go to Walmart. Now, if you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, those people were willing to walk over a year, summer, winter, whatever, because they wanted their children to live in a different world. And we won't drive a little further to a different ATM. We won't spend a little more look, freedom has never been convenient. Slave revolts were not convenient. So we think somehow the rest of this is going to be convenient and we're going to experience liberation while living in ease and convenience. And that's just lunacy. If we really love our children like we say we do, we will embrace a little discomfort for them to live in a different world. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet.
Okay, you know what? I'll take it. I'll take it that some of us might have felt targeted. Okay, I don't know. I'm just saying. Well, let me just counter though that many Black-owned businesses, I currently and in the past, were threatened by these white businesses. And sometimes things were not necessarily always a choice when sometimes your businesses were burnt down, your family were threatened, your houses were shot up and burning crosses placed in yards and things like that, that sometimes scared people. So I want to say that we can't all blame everything. We don't want you to be quiet, but we got to say everything. We got to include all of these oppressors pressing.
Absolutely. Can I respond to that? It's much deeper than you think. There have been several moments in history where Black businesses have almost been wiped out. So you think about the experience of the Greenwood District in Tulsa, that massacre. Well, that's just one. Like, a few people know about that, but there was a bunch of those, right? The next big one was actually the construction of the interstates. And we don't think about this. Anytime you see an interstate in America, you probably had a thriving Black business district. So Dr. Vincent's in Atlanta, go to Auburn Avenue, which in, I think, 1956, Fortune magazine called it the richest Negro street in the world. Well, when they built the 75-85 connector, they literally built it right through that neighborhood. You think about Black Bottom in Detroit, the same thing. Think about Nashville. About 80% of all Black businesses in Nashville were destroyed when they built I-40. That is surgical laser precision and targeting of Black business districts. So this, again, it's not like a wild conspiracy theory. This is a real thing. So
okay. We're saying the same things. I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, it's real.
We agree. We're a family. Okay, I like it. Mr. Joseph, somehow Mr. Hopewell must have known that my question was going to be, should we be protesting with dollars and dimes or just signs or both? I think he answered that, but let me hear your opinion on that as well.
The thing is, as we talk about the velocity of the dollar, how the dollar moves around, it's very important to understand that how community assets are built and how people derive value from the community assets. So if you have a Black neighborhood and they have certain assets and the assets are not being financed or funded, then those assets are going to deteriorate. And as a result of that, the wealth that can be generated in that community is obviously going to go down. Now, there are people who argue that, well, I've worked with Black business and owners and they never give me the right type of service that I want. And so as a result, I'm taking my dollars elsewhere. Well, the truth is you have to demand the value just as you demand from any other company, from the black business owners. And the more people feel like that value is being demanded, the more they're going to rise up to that. Now, the other part about in terms of our signs, yes, the signs are important, but the dimes are also very important. The dimes have to go around, and it has to be such that, in order for people to move forward, we have to really help build that infrastructure that is needed. And just as he said, you can expect to have, we can expect to have what we need if we don't make those sacrifices. So a sacrifice will be definitely looking out to get to spend some of your dollars in the Black-owned enterprises as well as wherever you want to spend.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, I guess I'm going to let the people ask you all their questions now, panelists. I'm going to pass the mic. We have a lot of people are saying that Mr. Hopewell was preaching over there. We have so many questions. I'm going to try to go back here. Here we have a question. Anyone can take this. This question is a YouTube question for us. And the question is, what are some ways we can teach our youth early on about finances and wealth? There is so much that they don't teach you in school, like credit, taxes, etc. They don't teach you any of those things now. I remember like parents saying that they learned how to like balance a checkbook back. I didn't learn that. I don't know about Dr. Vincent. Did they teach that for you and down there in Florida? They don't do that over here in the DC area either. So what are some ways that we can teach our youth early on about finances and wealth, and the 35 plus as well?
I can hop in there. I think kind of going off of what I had mentioned before, it's the idea of getting access to the information. And a huge part of that is just honestly going online. I would say things like pre-existing programs, like even like a Khan Academy equivalent of being able to hop onto YouTube, find videos to just learn. And I'm sure that there are several other types of similar programs that are like more catered toward kids. Khan Academy is probably like a great intro level for like adults who don't have as much of a strong knowledge in business or personal finance and things like that. But I think the information is so readily available that we can kind of start utilizing that into just regular everyday practices. So whether that's like with an allowance, for instance, when you're thinking about specifically with children, starting kids off with having some access of money, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It really can just be like $1, $5, just really getting the sense of what value does that hold? If it's associated with a chore or something like that, to show that work correlates with earning, and then like the ability to then use that money to purchase something. I think for me, that was something growing up that was incredibly helpful. We didn't get an allowance or anything like that, but I remember I grew up really cheap, but whenever we would get money, like let's say we had a field trip or something, I knew that there was a value to that money that I got, that I could save some of the money, or I could go buy like a souvenir or something. And I was the type of kid, I would prefer to save my money than to have the souvenir. Whereas my siblings, they often bought the souvenir, but we were learning, all of us were learning in that process, because my parents would then point it out. They would say, well, hey, my brother, if he bought a souvenir, they would say, that's awesome. Like he bought this thing, he now has whatever it is that he finds of value. Atasha, she chose to keep the money, and we would have conversations about that. So I think it's really about talking about it as much as possible, but then finding the information too that is actually pretty readily available online.
Yeah, I would like to chip in on that, if that's okay. I think there is a lot of research out there with respect to, how kids learn. And there are a lot of books out there as well. I know one book, Teen Money by Stacey Morris, which is also a very good book for folks to read, especially with young folks. What I've actually realized, and this is happening in my house, is that ever since I started my own entrepreneurial venture, my kids have been very, very interested in how money is made and how you can save and to do all things that are related to money, and the excitement and the enthusiasm around, hey, daddy's working on his business. I don't think that can easily be taught, but by observing, you can see the kids themselves getting very excited. And I think that is one of the things that we can teach our kids, especially teaching them about business ownership, entrepreneurship, and basically by doing that, they get to learn what is important, how to basically think about not working that 9-to-5 job if they can help it, and to start building their own wealth. I think the second part is basically there is a lot of folks, myself, I actually sort of, give my time to teach and educate other folks to tell them about what is possible. And when you do that with kids, the way they take it is a totally different level. Now, we cannot only focus on our kids. I think there is the whole different groups of people who still need to learn these, tax advantage strategies, investing, how are they going to live on retirement? What monies have they saved? Do they have a budget and all of that? And it's not only about when you're accumulating wealth, but also what is really important is when you get to the distribution age, because when you're accumulating wealth, you just really think about every day I'm going to have a paycheck. What really counts and where we have a lot of people losing their property, losing their houses, is when we get to the distribution stage, when there's no monies coming in and the only thing they're relying on is Social Security, there's no 401k, there is nothing. And then that becomes where we actually start getting to see a lot of mental health issues as well, because now you have somebody who has made so much money throughout their life and they thought they were going to make something, and then in the end they have nothing. And when you have these serious health issues pop up, including potentially maybe something that they never foresaw, and then they tend to basically take equity from their own house and end up with nothing in the end. So, I think that the education is across board for all ages, and for each age group, there's something specific that we can do for them.
Yeah, we probably need a whole talk about these reverse mortgages that they are doing to scam these older people, because I had to have a talk with some people in my family about that. But
there are two things I wanted to hop on after that. I 100% relate to the point you said about when kids can see money being made and the inquisitiveness that just comes up with that, because that is what my experience was in the Caribbean. My parents owned really small stores, and as kids we literally would just spend the weekends just sitting in the corner in the store while they were doing their business, whatever. And just even having that experience was just something that we just soaked in over time. And then the other point to adult learning that I really want to emphasize, because it's been touched on but not so much emphasized yet, is the idea of having a financial advisor. So I know Dr. Hairston, you've mentioned it, and I know Joseph, you're doing a ton of work kind of in that space. But from even myself, I feel like I have a lot of knowledge. I feel like I have experience through kind of what I've learned growing up. But having a financial advisor now is probably even one of the more important aspects of that planning and growth building phase, because I have someone who is external to me, objective to my experience, kind of giving guidance, telling me about the different insurance options that exist, about how to allocate the 401ks, the Roth IRAs, doing all of that kind of work. So it's not that you have to necessarily have all the information yourself, but I always like to emphasize knowing where to find it. And then Dr. Harrison, you mentioned yours costs money right now because I'm a resident, so I have limited income. My financial advisor actually does not charge, and so I think that's something to look into. So finding advisors who are willing to work with you to give you the information, because at the end of the day, information is always power.
Thank you for that, Dr. Jordan. Shout out to my financial advisor, who was a Black woman. No shade to charging money and knowing your worth. Definitely, I believe in that. So,
and can I make a quick plug for people who are interested in starting their own businesses as psychiatrists? I found the SBA, the Small Business Association website, actually quite helpful. They have tools to help you create your business plan. My first mortgage on my business property was an SBA loan. The IRS even has videos about different sorts of corporate structures. And so it doesn't replace a financial advisor, but it's a good place to start, and it's free and it's readily accessible. And you'd be surprised at what you can find on some of those websites.
Thank you, Dr. Vincent. You must have known. I was about to ask you, Dr. Sugawola, a question over here that we have. They want to know if y'all can comment about the correlations between higher education and higher income and the rates of depression in Black men. If you aren't aware, there was a Washington Post article that said that Black men with higher education and higher incomes that didn't actually lower their risk for depression. So for those of you who are psychiatrists or Black men who may or may not have experienced depression, do you have any insight, Dr. Vincent or Dr. Sobowole, Kumi, any insight onto how people can have more money and more problems?
Yeah, and I'll make my quick comment and get out the way for the Black men to answer. But I have a private practice in Atlanta that sees a lot of middle and upper income Black folks. And what can happen sometimes, and it's less so the case in Atlanta, but still, as you go up, there are fewer people that look like you around. And so human beings are social creatures and we need community, and that ability to find community may lessen as you progress economically or educationally, especially as a Black man. And so I think that's a part of what you see is that you can't out-earn racism and marginalization and being treated as if you don't deserve to be in that room when you probably are even more qualified to be there in the first place. And the stress of that can definitely lead to mental health issues.
Thank you for that. Any other comments?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like basically, there's there's discrimination against Black men, even Black men who have higher educations, who are less likely to get a certain job, who may have higher qualifications but still make less than a white person who doesn't have those same qualifications. They've looked at Raj Chetty, who's a famous economist, has looked at social mobility throughout the United States for Black men and Black women too. And basically what you find is that in 99% of the counties in the US, that Black men are less likely to make more than their parents made. And part of that was related to things like Black fathers being more likely to be incarcerated. They didn't really see that discrepancy as much with Black women versus white women. But it does take a lot of wear and tear as one progresses economic strata as a Black man in the United States. There's a overt discrimination. There's imposter syndrome, thinking you're not good enough. And there's been some work that actually looks at that Black men are more likely to have kind of higher inflammation as they progress through economic strata. So, and we know that can be something that increases risk for things like depression. So I didn't read this study, but there's, a lot of different reasons why that may be the case.
Thank you for that. Any other Black men want to say anything before I go to the next question, or y'all good? They got it? Okay. So this question might be for Mr. Hopewell. It's not exactly a question. I'm just gonna shoot it over here for you to comment because you are We Buy Black here. Now, sometimes they say that Black businesses don't always treat their customers well or gratefully. There's complaints about Black businesses and their customer service and things like that. And people say, well, I tried to buy Black, but then they didn't answer me quickly, or they took so long to ship my item and they don't have what I need in stock. What, Mr. Hopewell, Mr. We Buy Black, can you tell me what do we say to people who have these comments in the Black community?
All right, let me get a 20-second timeout. I'm going to try to answer this question as composed as possible. I take her point, and I certainly wouldn't want to invalidate her experience. I do question whether or not that's people's whole experience. I think we live in a world that is so anti-Black that even as Black people, we see the world and through that lens of anti-Blackness. And so when Wells Fargo literally admits to stealing its customers' money, nobody freaks out and says, I got to move to another bank. Let a Black bank steal 5 nickels, because we're getting this amazing customer service at Starbucks and they're literally arresting you for sitting down. But let a Black person not smile long enough. So I think we need to be careful with this. I think as a rule, there are exceptions. I think as a rule, customer service is trash everywhere. Black, white, red. I mean, that's just where we are. I think because we see the world through this lens that can be anti-Black, we catalog those experiences differently when it's a Black-owned company. I would venture to say if we were very careful in cataloging our experiences, it's the interaction we have with Sprint and how trash, like we have these trash experiences with all these companies, but somehow, some way, only that one gets cataloged. And so I would say this. I think customer service across the board is trash. And look, there's case studies on this. I remember reading, and I want to be careful because I don't remember the source, but Chick-fil-A apparently was like one of the few fast food outlets that actually grew during the Great Recession. And it's not that their fries were any different than anyone's. The one thing that people could point to was what? Customer service. Customer service is so rare that if you do it, you're amazing, right? So I hear that part. I think as a Black consumer, though, it's on us to be fair across the board. And so if you're saying my customer experience was not great at Lola's Chicken Shack, why the hell are you at Starbucks? If you're saying my customer experience was so, just let's be consistent is all I'm going to ask of you today. That is my only request. So when I see you walk into any of these other businesses, just stop. Now, the other thing about it is this. Again, because of anti-Blacks, we have a tendency to have a bad experience at a Starbucks and say, well, that's that employee. That's not the business. But somehow when you walk into a Black one, Black businesses, somehow you don't index that to the employee, right? So we're my only problem is we are wildly inconsistent. And I just think we need to be careful. Now, my next point would be this. Regardless of that, let's assume everything she said is true. Let's assume everything she said is true. And I hopefully, and again, this is not a personal attack. I'm just, if all that is true, does that justify me financing the oppression of my children for the next 50 years? And I'm going to answer resounding no. It can't be. But again, when I see things like, right before the Los Angeles riots and Rodney King, there was a 15-year-old girl, Latasha Hollins, who gets shot by the Korean grocer. I bet you all still went in that. Let's be consistent is all I'm going to ask of you. I do agree. Customer service is trash universally. I think Black consumers ought to demand more of Black companies because we have a vested interest. And look, I've definitely walked from Black-owned companies. I've talked to them. I've, expressed my grievance. And if they didn't, I've walked. But you know what I did? I found another Black alternative. I left this company and sought out another one. I didn't make it an indictment on all Black business owners. So this is the type of anti-Blackness we have to be very careful of and really monitor, because I hear it a lot and I think it's very damaging. It's like saying, I don't like this, so I'm going to hurt myself, because that's what we're doing.
Okay. You know what? Thank you for that. If anyone has ever read anything that I've written or said, there's levels to racism. And while we do have institutional and systemic, we also have this one down here that sometimes people don't want to discuss. Dr. Vincent, you might have heard of it, called internalized racism, where you start to believe and absorb.
I'm not going to take you seriously if you have a Wells Fargo card in your wallet talking about customer service. You literally have no credibility. Stop. What are we talking about? What are we talking? I hear Black people say this stuff. I'm just just self-awareness. It has to be a little bit higher than this. And again, it's not a personal attack. It's a plea for us to care enough about ourselves, to love ourselves, to build ourselves for our children's sake, is all I'm asking.
I feel you on that, and I hear you. Okay, I'm trying to get all these questions over here. This one could be for any and all of you. Crystal Hill over here asks, what are some recommended books to read to increase our knowledge about this? And I think this could be Buying Black, Wealth Building, The Wealth Gap, anything like that. Any books that any of you lovely, well-read, knowledgeable panelists can recommend. I'm going to first go to Mr. Armah because I see Mr. Howell looking for books back there. So that is not a Zoom background. Okay. Mr. Armah, any books that you can recommend? Because we're getting good comments from you about you over here.
Things that I would like to talk about really briefly is that, some of the articles are what we get wrong closing the racial gap. I think I really like that research that was put forward, what we get wrong about closing the racial gap, because it tries to debunk a lot of myths that we have about what Blacks do and what they don't do. But at the same time, it also allows you to really think critically about whether some of those things are correct. I think there is a nice piece of work done by McKinsey, the economic impact of closing the racial wealth gap, done in 2019, which I think is also really nice because it really feeds into the fact that closing the racial gap is only not to the advantage of Blacks, but actually to the whole U.S. economy. There are trillions of dollars that can be made when you think about how do we close this racial wealth gap, because we all stand to benefit. And I like to conclude by, I always follow Chris Voss, who is an FBI agent who's written a lot of work, written a lot of books, especially on the topic of never split the difference. And I think one of the things that we have to really be very cognizant of is, as we are going through this process, we have to understand what it means to have tactical empathy and forced empathy, because we stand at a point where we are the minority and then there's a majority. So to the extent that we can let the majority see where we are coming from and asking the questions, how do I do that? How do I close the racial wealth gap? You'll be in my shoes for a second. And I think that is going to really help in terms of the dialogue and then moving us forward.
A book that I just started just for historical context, and I actually learned about it in the course of one of my forensic psychiatry evals, where the social history was just talking about the intergenerational poverty that the family had experienced. But it's called The Half Has Never Been Told: Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism by Edward E. Baptist. And it is fascinating. And I'm one of those kids who my mom gave me Black history books to read growing up. And there's so much that's there that is completely new to me. And so in terms of just laying the framework and helping you understand how deep this goes and how entrenched it is, I think it's a really good read for that.
Thank you for that, Dr. Vin.
Some books.
One book I had is kind of different. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. That's okay.
So the book I was going to recommend, it's a little bit different than the two resources that have been recommended so far, but I find it very fascinating. It's a book called God and Money. It was written by some Harvard Business School students, and basically for people who are of faith, who are spiritual, and the book is from a Christian perspective, but it's basically talking about how in the process of trying to build wealth, you can still honor God with your money. And that for me has actually been something that has been incredibly eye-opening and just kind of allowing me to do quite a bit of reflection. So for anyone who's watching who happens to be of faith and interested in something like that, God and Money is a book I'm reading that I really enjoy.
Two books from kind of a historical point of view that I like is one is Evicted, which talks about housing in the U.S. and how that contributes to wealth gaps, particularly for Black folks. Another book that just came out that I have yet to listen to, but the audiobook is called From Here to Equality, and it talks about reparations for Black people, and it's by William Dorothy, or Sandy Dorothy, who is probably one of the foremost Black economic scholars, and really dispels a lot of myths about slavery and other big policies that were discriminatory towards Black folks. Another book for those who are like interested in the policy level is Raising the Floor, which I really like. That one talks about the idea of a basic income, which is one policy solution. Just in terms of like financial kind of advice or kind of more literacy stuff, there's lots of good podcasts out there. That's one of the things during residency and as a med student that I did that I found really helpful. So just some different resources to think about.
Thank you for that. I see you're ready. Okay.
A lot of people always ask, like, well, what can we do? What you do? Is there a blueprint? Yes, there actually. There's a gentleman by the name of Amos Wilson. He's since departed some years back, but he's one of the most brilliant thinkers ever of any race, any gender. And the book is literally Blueprint for Black Power. This gentleman, he deals with political, he deals with financial, investing. I mean, you name it. So if you just want, as far as a broad framework of how to approach things, I would recommend that text.
Thank you for that. You all don't know, I don't know, but the people want y'all to all write the names of these books in the chat over here for them, because they are, like me, learners over here and willing and ready to learn. And no one asked me, but I would just like to say that Black Fortunes by Shamari Wills is also, I don't know if everyone's heard about that, but that's a good book, and it discusses the historical context of Black wealth in America and what happened there. And I also want to say, yeah, I second evicted and anything that explains the redlining policies, because I think that a lot of times people say that, oh, I'm not privileged. I might be white, but I don't have white privilege. I'm not racist. And you literally have the privilege of housing and income, and just how that really establishes wealth in this country, and I mean, in the world, but especially in this country. All right, everyone. So I am going to let the panelists, if you can, type your answers over there in the chat. And I'm going to ask everyone for their closing comment here. What is your take-home point? What is the one thing that, if no one listened to anything else you said, even though they're all telling me that y'all are over here preaching and truth, coming with the facts, if there's anything that you all would like to say, and I'm going to just start down here at the bottom of the screen with Atasha, Dr. Jordan. Final comments, final advice, anything for us over here?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing I want to make sure people remember is the idea of wealth as a mindset, and really just recognizing that wherever you're at is the starting point and doesn't have to be where you end up, and really recognizing like what is the goal of where you want to end up being, and then empower yourself with the knowledge to be able to get there. Because with this wealth mindset, we create a space where we can create generational wealth. And that is truly what I want to be able to see in the Black community, where we are able to pass down, whether it is land, money, funds, whatever, to the next generations coming after us. And we can only do that if right now for ourselves, we determine that we're going to learn the information we need and have the mindset to work towards building wealth.
Thank you for that. Dr. Vincent, any comments for us as we get ready to exit this Black Wealth and Mental Health Town Hall? Are we having another one?
Yeah.
Are we having another one coming up? Tell me, what's your comment?
Well, just to the fellow psychiatrists, a piece of advice that people gave me early in my career was that if I wanted to do advocacy work, they said I need not be dependent on any institution financially. And I took that to heart, and definitely having multiple streams of income, not depending on any institution that can tell me what to say or what not to say, and being able to leave any given job at any given time and be fine has been critical in my being able to advocate and do things that are meaningful to me and that serve my community. So please do not see wealth or pursuing it as selfish or something that should cause you to question your roots or your morals. This is actually something that can give you the freedom to do the things that are meaningful to you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Vincent. Truth. I think you can't be free without the actual financial freedom to do as you would like. Nothing to you, Howard University. Thank you for supporting me in this as you pay me. All right. Kumi, Dr. Sobowale, any remarks from you?
Yeah, I would say that to remember that being poor is very expensive, both monetarily and psychologically. So we need to think about what we can do on the individual level to support people financially and to support their mental health. And with COVID, a lot of these things are going to be exacerbated for the Black community. I think we got to keep our eye on the ball and advocate for policies as well, because of the historical injustice that have resulted in this Black wealth gap and mental health gap. So just keeping our eye on the ball in the big picture.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, next to the top of the screen, Mr. Hopewell, Dewan, please. You've dropped so many facts on us, so much knowledge. I hope we can all carry this home with us tonight, but please tell us any final take-home points from We Buy Black. We need to continue buying Black. But what else do you want us to know?
I didn't realize that Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012. That is 8 years ago. That's almost a decade. And many, not all, but many Black people have literally spent the last 8 years with the pursuit of white people saying 3 magical words: Black Lives Matter. And I asked you, what is the value of that? And, after Bloody Sunday in Selma, John Lewis, who's passed, he got beat down pretty good. And Lyndon Johnson got up before Congress and he said, "We shall overcome," which was the equivalent at that time of saying Black Lives Matter. Just because someone says the word Black Lives Matter, what is the value of that? And so I'm asking you to embrace the inconvenience that it takes to truly live free for your children's sake.
A word. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Hopewell. You know that Netflix documentary with Killer Mike when he went to the Black grocery stores and was buying all the Black things?
I'm aware of it. I've not seen it though.
Oh man, I wonder if you guys have all those people, those businesses, from like laundry detergent to toothpaste. Do you have that on We Buy Black?
Yeah, We Buy Black. We have, you name it. It's there. Like I said,
I just want to be able to know if I could still wash my clothes as I support all Black businesses.
Also, you should know We Buy Black. We just launched a fulfillment center. So in the past you would buy this thing from that person, this thing from that, and so you're paying 3 different shipping charges. So we launched fulfillment, and so we've launched what we call our Black Bag, where you can get a collection of Black-owned products without paying 6 different charges for shipping. So we are trying to make it more convenient for the customer because we love convenience. But we're growing and we're trying to get there. And certainly, again, there are other avenues, even locally. We get millions of people who go, how can I find this? There's Google, there's research. I mean, things that you're actually interested in, you put the time to learn about. So yeah, go at it.
Thank you for that. I mean, of course, you know that I already knew that because I do my research and I knew that. But I like the We Buy Black customer service of making the bags so that we can limit our shipping charges because some people like Amazon. All right. And we're going to close out with Mr. Joseph Armand. Please take us home with your closing points. Are you ready to be the financial advisor for all of the Black community here? For all of our viewers who are going to be watching it, tell us, what is it that we need to know as we close out? Oh, you're muted. Okay, there we go. Say it again.
So first of all, thank you for organizing this. I think the community really needed it, and I've enjoyed being on the panel, and I hope most people who watched it also benefited. So there are a couple of points that I just want to make real quickly before we move on. The first is we have to understand the power of our vote. And when we're talking about structural, political, and institutional changes, one of the easiest ways to get there is to actually vote. And when you're voting, not just talk about the folks at the highest level, you have to also focus on the folks at the places that are very closest to you, including your city mayor and all those folks, because it's so important to make sure that some of the things that we talked about are implemented in the right way. The second part is that I think there are elements that are currently available, such as from education, financial planning, thinking about retirement, thinking about building your own businesses. And I think we have to make sure that we leverage what we have and you use it to the best of our benefit. And I think the last part is there are folks like me who really, and I partner with my wife as well, who is a psychiatrist, who are willing to devote some of our time to help the community to educate and to do pro bono work. So I think we should look at that as well, as folks who also have that education and that knowledge in our community, to use that and to to help the bigger community. And I think on that note, I just want to say that if you're also interested in working with a financial advisor, I'm here to help. Thank you.
You're muted, Danielle. Dr. Harrison.
Okay. See, I was listening to Mr. Joseph Armand, and I got distracted. All right. Well, thank you to our panelists. You can see all of their IG and social media tags, and we will make sure that you know how to find them. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for agreeing to do this. And thank you also to Dr. Armand for making sure that Mr. Armand Joseph was going to be on here with us today. And I appreciate each one of you for all the knowledge that you drop. As you know, I am at a doc named Danny, and this is the platform for the community at Black Psychiatry on IG and Twitter. The YouTube video will be available as soon as YouTube goes through it and make sure that there's nothing obscene. We will have it up there. I should have known that the one about wealth and mental health was going to go our longest ever, and I'm here for it because we all need this knowledge and information. And I truly appreciate each one of you for joining. I think we might have to have a part 2 after people start buying Black, investing, buying back their blocks, and reading and listening to some podcasts. So I hope that you all will be available. Maybe we'll do some IG lives out here. And so I just want to thank all of you for that. I want to thank you to the BPA and Howard University for supporting me. They know my wealth and worth here and making sure that we got this done. So please remember to follow us and follow me, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you all. We'll have this up for you, and have a great night. Thank you again to our panelists. And I hope that this has brought some value, and we have really understand that without financial wealth, we can't really discuss mental health. Thank you all.